Over the course of the past year, there have been calls from leftist content creators, labor organizers, and even liberals for a general strike. At least once, hashtag general strike was trending on Twitter in the United States, and incredibly, the largest general strike in recorded history is happening in India. With all this talk of a general strike, many are beginning to wonder why hasn't it become a reality, while others are calling for us to start the general strike right this very moment. So, are we ready for a general strike? In other words, do we have what we need to carry one out? No. And to explain why, today we're going to talk about some of the things we would need to organize a general strike. But since it's not an Elke series without talking about history, in 3 upcoming videos, I'm going to cover general strikes to demonstrate why we will need the things I list in this video. So first and foremost, what is a general strike? A general strike is a large-scale work stoppage of a significant amount of a labor force within an industry, community, or nation. Unlike in a regular strike, which only involves employees striking against a single employer, a general strike involves workers from a majority of industries striking against their employers, and oftentimes against local and federal government. When it comes to the history of general strikes, you'll see a lot of people claim that the first one was the Secessio Plebis. The 5 secession of the plebes were not general strikes. While they were mass work stoppages, they did not occur in a system where large amounts of workers sold their labor to an employer in exchange for wages. There wasn't exactly the relationship between the patricians and the plebeians. The first event that we can call a general strike was the Scottish General Strike of 1820. The first one in the United States was the Philadelphia General Strike of 1835. I'm not going to talk about it here because I covered it in this video at this time step, if you're interested in it. In most American general strikes, a large union base was necessary to decide whether or not to have a general strike and when it would happen. General strikes in the past typically didn't just start with all workers going out at once. They started when workers from a major industry went out on strike and unionized workers citywide voted to join them in a sympathy strike. Today, we simply do not have enough of the American labor force unionized to organize a general strike in this way. In the case of New Orleans in 1892, several unions were organized in a short amount of time. Unfortunately, unionizing a workplace nowadays takes repeated attempts over months and even years. Workers' committees and other small organizations could be the alternative we need, but there are limitations to how effective they will be if not enough of the workforce is represented. At the bare minimum, we're going to need workers organized into something that can be further organized into a strike committee. We will need strike committees in nearly every major community to organize a national general strike. In the case of Seattle in 1919, union members sent delegates to the strike committee to represent them. Our strike committee will likely be very different in how it's organized. Ultimately, any United States general strike that occurs in the near future will have to be organized from the bottom up, because there may not be a national strike committee even if unions are involved. And speaking of, let's talk about unions and organization limitations. Even if a majority of workers were unionized, unions or a union federation would be unlikely to call a national general strike. During this entire pandemic, the AFL-CIO has only threatened a general strike once, and that is if Trump refuses to leave office. I go as far to say they won't ever try one because general strikes would necessitate sympathy strikes or secondary strikes, which are outlawed by the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. A labor federation would do a cost-risk analysis and almost certainly come to the conclusion that it isn't worth the risk, unless maybe the general strike organized is a truly national undertaking and the consequences wouldn't be utterly catastrophic. Even if the AFL-CIO did organize a general strike, one could argue that they would be much more willing to compromise than to get what the strikers truly need. Could individual unions go out on their own? Well, they could, but it would be extremely risky. They would need financial support, and again, it would still require illegal secondary strikes in order for the action to grow into a general strike. In order to have a general strike, rules and laws are going to have to be broken, and people are going to need to be convinced to do so. By the way, after virtually every general strike, there are legal consequences of some kind for the organizers. This is one reason why you almost certainly will not have politicians calling for or supporting the general strike in any meaningful way. AOC or the squad might tweet or talk about it, but their role at most will be getting the word out. And remember, AOC is not universally beloved, and I'm not just talking about conservatives. Having politicians connected to the general strike will alienate a considerable amount of the public, so it's probably not a good idea to have them in leading roles. Okay, what about doing this without unions? A nationwide wildcat general strike has happened before in May of 1968 in France, but the American workforce is currently too atomized and polarized to carry one out. Many of the scenarios I mentioned above are possible. They are just highly unlikely at this moment. How a general strike will be organized and the roles unions might fill will depend heavily on how we organize the working class in the coming years. Let's talk about preparing for the general strike. General strikes, at least ones in the US, tended to be somewhat spontaneous. The time between the primary workers going out on strike and the secondary workers joining them was usually between a few days to a couple of weeks. While in the past, workers had a relatively short amount of time to prepare for a potential general strike, we'll have months or years to prepare, but we have to start today. As we'll see in Seattle and Minneapolis, we are going to need massive community aid networks that can support whole cities. If the general strike lasts long enough, we will need to be able to feed thousands of people, keep them from getting evicted, and keep them entertained. We're going to need jail support for people who get arrested, and maybe even militias to protect strikers. If strikers do not have what they need to survive, they will get discouraged, give up, and go back to work. It's happened before, and it will happen again. Historically, unions and union halls played a large role in strike support, but if we don't have them, we will need community leaders and organizers to fill their roles. All of us need to find our local support groups, join their ranks, and help them. We need to learn how to support communities by actually doing it. These networks won't just fall into place. They have to be planned in advance. Do we want whole communities in darkness, or any fires to rage until they go out on their own? Do we want to shut down hospitals in the middle of a pandemic? No, obviously. Much like in Seattle, we are going to want some workers to continue doing their jobs at some capacity in order to make the strike livable. For example, we may have to work with farmers directly if we decide grocery store workers will be out on strike. People who have experience doing retail supply chain logistics or any type of logistics are going to be big players here. Who continues to work during the general strike will have to be decided by the General Strike Committee and the workers themselves. Let's assume we get all that squared away and workers walk out. What will workers do during the strike? There are a couple of different possibilities. Workers could just stay at home. This would keep the general strike peaceful, which would help keep people on our side. The police, militias, and the National Guard might be less likely to break the strike if they can't easily attack strikers. However, simply staying at home opens up the possibility of scabs going into workplaces to help employers starve out the strike. Occupying workplaces is also illegal under the Taft-Hartley Act, but it has proved pretty effective at keeping scabs out. Some combination of both might be necessary. Again, this is something strike committees and strikers will decide. The press will be a major problem. The media will unsurprisingly side with employers and Congress. They will attempt to smear the general strike as anything other than a just struggle of working people. We are going to need people who will document the strike, set the record straight, and keep people on our side. We're going to need propagandists. I'm looking at the terminally online folks, especially on Twitter. It's going to be on you to counter the media's attempts to divide the working class and keep spirits high. Anytime CNN or Fox tries to paint the general strike as a violent uprising, y'all will show that most people are peaceful and fighting for our just goal. I believe that content creators like the Serfs will play a major role here. They will be the ones filling roles that the mainstream media normally fills. They will be educating and entertaining strikers while also alerting them to where aid is needed on the ground. Employers and politicians will only go to the bargaining table when all other options have been exhausted. In regards to a national general strike, it would be even more difficult as we will be trying to force concessions from the federal government. Congress does not want a general strike, but they also don't want to give us concessions. They are much more likely to attempt to make an example of the demonstration and refuse to concede demands while putting down the strike as violently as they deem necessary. Seriously, precedents ordering the National Guard to break strikes goes back nearly 200 years. In 1877, President Hayes ordered the National Guard to break railroad strikes city by city. There is not a clear path to getting employers and Congress to concede, but effectively shutting down the nation will definitely be one of the requirements. There isn't room for error in that sort of situation, but if we do it correctly and fight hard, we can win. In the case that we actually succeed, the government would be forced to concede our demands, or striking committee leaders would possibly get a chance to negotiate with politicians. It's hard to say. If we lose, everyone goes back to work if they aren't blacklisted. In either case, the organizers would be arrested and charged with a laundry list of crimes, and legislation will probably follow to further limit the labor movement in America. And that's why it's important to understand that in order to have a national general strike, we have to be as prepared as possible, because we might not get a second chance for a very long time. The last notable general strike in this country occurred in 1946. Currently, we are nowhere near ready to have a general strike for COVID relief or anything else. There's still way too much work to be done. But if we leftists start organizing in our communities, in our workplaces, and in our apartment complexes, one day we will be able to have one and win. And I think that point will become very clear in my next 3 videos when we talk about 3 American general strikes and see what organizers and workers did to make them a reality. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two about general strikes, why not like and share? Subscribe if you want to learn more about labor history and so you'll know when the next video comes out. I'm sure the comments are going to be a riot on this one. Anyway, until next time, see ya.